Don't, don't do this, she pleaded again, her voice thin against the wind that swept across the wide ranch fields. It wasn't the kind of wind that came and went. It was the kind that stayed, the kind that wrapped itself around every word until the words barely belonged to the speaker anymore. Lena stood a few paces behind Holt, her boots half buried in dust as she watched him at the fence he'd spent the entire night building. From her view, he looked carved into the landscape, tall, steady, unshaken, like he had grown right out of the soil he was fighting for. He didn't answer immediately. Holt never rushed words. Instead, he kept his hand resting on the last section of fence post as if thinking about how deep the wood went, how far into history this land really stretched. They already warned you, Lena said quietly, stepping closer. 3 letters, 2 visits, 1 final notice. If you go any farther, they'll shut you down for good. Still, Holt stared across the field. Brown, windswept, lonely except for the shapes of old oak trees and grazing cattle that had belonged to his father and his father before him. Finally, he spoke. This land was taken once, he said, voice firm but not angry. Not again. Lena breathed in sharply. She had heard bits and pieces. Rumors whispered in town about the Holt family, about land disputes from decades ago, about boundary lines changed quietly through committee signatures and unrecorded surveys. Most people didn't care, or maybe they chose not to. But Holt had never forgotten. Before dawn broke, he lifted the heavy metal stake in both hands. The sound it made when it hit soil was sharp, echoing across the field like a shot. Not violent, just final. And that was all it took. Word spread faster than Lena could comprehend. Small towns didn't need phones to communicate bad news, they only needed open windows and curious eyes. By sunrise, rumors drifted through the diner. By mid-morning, the feed store was buzzing. By noon, even the gas station had customers whispering about Holt putting up a fence he had no right to build. It's just a fence, Lena tried to reason. It's not a fence. It's a statement, Holt muttered. Trucks slowed on the road. Neighbors leaned across steering wheels, disapproval pinned to their faces like name tags. Every new hammer strike drew a fresh audience, drawn not by curiosity but by outrage that someone dared to challenge what the town decided years ago. Please, Lena said softly, not begging, just trying. You don't know how far they'll go. Holt drove another nail through wood and metal, face set, eyes narrowing. Oh, I know exactly how far they'll go, he said. What they don't know, he paused, hammer still raised, is how far I'm willing to go too. Lena felt the wind shift, colder somehow. Something irreversible had just begun by noon. Half the town had gathered along the fence line, some leaning against pickup doors, others standing with arms crossed tight enough to cut off circulation. They weren't just curious. They were agitated, offended, almost insulted that Holt had decided to challenge rules they believed were already settled. Lena stood on the porch, hands wrapped around her elbows, watching the crowd grow bigger by the minute. Every time she thought the last car had arrived, another engine rolled up the dusty road. She could hear the hiss of whispered conversations even from across the field. When Holt finally stepped away from the fence and faced them, the air seemed to shift. Conversations died mid-sentence. People straightened up, as if ready for a showdown they'd rehearsed in their minds long before this day arrived. One man in a faded baseball cap took a few steps forward. You're breaking the law, he snapped, voice sharp. No, Holt answered calmly, I'm fixing a mistake that never should have happened. Lena watched their eyes lock, one full of accusation, the other full of quiet storm. Another woman spoke next, her voice shaky with anger. "We have permits, paperwork, decisions made by the council. You can't undo that just because you feel like it." Holt didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "The decisions were made without looking at the original boundaries," he said. "And those boundaries don't lie." Someone scoffed loudly. Another swore under their breath. A few people exchanged frustrated glances, irritated not by what Holt said, but because he said it so confidently, as if he already knew the ending of this story while they were still reading the first page. The rumble of approaching tires cut through the argument. A black and white sheriff's SUV rolled slowly into view, lights flashing silently even though there was no emergency, at least not the kind the sheriff usually handled. Lena's heart stuttered. This was the moment everything could collapse. The sheriff stepped out, broad shoulders, sunglasses, hat pulled low. He walked with authority, but not aggression. Holt reached into his coat and handed over a folded envelope. Old land deeds, original maps, signatures from men long gone. The sheriff took his time. He studied each document, brows furrowed, lips pressing together. The silence stretched so long the town seemed to hold its breath. Finally, he exhaled. "He's within his rights," the sheriff announced. Shock rippled through the crowd. The anger didn't disappear, it simply had nowhere to go. People muttered, stomped away, doors slamming, tires spitting gravel. A few stayed longer, glaring as if Holt had personally insulted each of them. But eventually, even they left. When the road finally emptied, Holt rested his hands on the fence he had claimed for his family. "You knew all along," Lena said softly, stepping up beside him. Holt didn't smile, but his eyes softened. "I've been waiting for this moment my entire life," he said. He looked across the land. Not triumphant, not smug, just peaceful, like something inside him had finally settled after years of fighting a battle most people never even saw. That night, under a sky streaked with fading pink, Holt sat on the porch. Lena sat beside him in quiet understanding. Somewhere behind them, cattle moved across soil finally returned to the hands it belonged to. And although the town was outraged, perhaps always would be, Holt knew one thing for certain. He had fought not against them, but for something that was never meant to be taken in the first place.